Hello and welcome to BERNAMA World. Today joining us is Martin Kent, His Majesty's Trade Commissioner for the Asia Pacific, who is here for Malaysia for the ASEAN Senior Economic Officials meeting. The UK, of course, has been stepping up its engagement with ASEAN, not just in trade and investment, but also in broader regional cooperation. Welcome to the studios.
Thank you so much.
I hope you've had a good time in Malaysia so far.
It's been incredibly good and it's been incredibly productive. Yesterday, as you mentioned, we held the ASEAN Senior Economic Officials UK consultation, and that's the annual event where the UK gets our chance to present to ASEAN Senior Economic Officials on what we've been up to, how we've been working together with ASEAN as such an important partner in the region, covering the economic growth programmes in particular that we're doing in partnerships with countries across the region.
Now, speaking about ASEAN, we know that it's UK's 8th largest trading partner, and the two-way trade has been moving up from 47.7 billion in 2023 to about 51.8 billion in 2024. So what are you expecting to achieve out of these discussions?
Well, over the last couple of days, we've been updating on our economic work, and central to that is a programme that we call our ASEAN Economic Integration Programme. That's a £25 million programme that the UK is funding over 4 years, and that focuses on three main pillars of work. One is around financial services, 2 is around open markets, and 3 is around regulatory reform. On the financial services side, we have UK banks working with banks and financial institutions across ASEAN to see how we can further drive financial inclusion across the region, how we can drive standards in financial services and drive a financial ecosystem that's more conducive to business and trade. On the open market side, we're looking at regulatory coherence and we're looking at elements of compliance and standards where we are able to bring British expertise, share that with ASEAN expertise and make sure that standards are raising across the board. And on regulatory reform, we have British regulators that are working in this region looking at upping standards to improve consumer safety, as well as making sure that standards are aligned so that it's much easier to trade between us. And all of that comes at a time where UK trade with ASEAN, as you mentioned, has increased just under 10% over the last year, driven by our free trade agreements, driven by CPTPP, and a real focus from the UK on ASEAN.
We're going to come back to the CPTPP, which you've mentioned, but you mentioned financial services, open market and regulatory reforms. Now, we know that the UK is positioning itself, of course, as the partner for ASEAN, not only in terms of growth, but also development. And we are actually looking at ASEAN projected to become the 4th largest economy by 2030. Why these three main areas you think are most strategic at this point in time?
So we've been working really closely with the ASEAN Secretariat and individual member states to try and work out how can the UK be the most impactful dialogue partner that we can be. We are the newest dialogue partner for ASEAN. We're in our 4th year. We'll be celebrating the big milestone of our 5th year anniversary next year. And I think part of being a dialogue partner to ASEAN is to try and identify where you can add most value to the ASEAN ecosystem, given your national strengths. And the UK's expert in those areas. We're very proud of how we operate. We have high standards of trade, and there's some elements combined with our world-leading financial services ecosystem that we're able to share with ASEAN and that we've seen excellent partnership on across the region.
So if we're talking about trade, we've ascertained that these are some of the focus areas, and you've definitely been in touch. And good luck for the milestone of not only becoming the newest partner of ASEAN in terms of impact dialogue, but I think beyond trade, when we're looking at UK's partnership with this region or with this bloc in a broader role, what are some of the thoughts that you're thinking about in terms of supply chain resilience? We've got security partnerships, which has been discussed quite a bit in the last few months, and of course sustainable development, which is the big elephant in the room when we're talking about are we really going to hit the 2030 targets?
Well, exactly as you say, economics and commerce, I think, is at the core of our foreign policy and our relationship with the world. And the UK has just laid out its industrial strategy and it's also its trade strategy. And these are strategies that look 10 years into the future, and they identify the priority sectors that we'll focus on and then the trading mechanisms that we'll use with partners to try to deliver mutual economic growth and prosperity. And our Foreign Secretary has made very clear that he believes that the security and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region as a whole is indivisible from the security and prosperity of the Euro-Atlantic. So these are intrinsically linked with one another. In terms of what that means for us on the ground, the industrial strategy lays out 8 priority sectors for the UK, and we're working with ASEAN to look at its community vision for 2045 to identify where economically our agendas are aligned so that we can get maximum benefit for our citizens by working together on the prosperity side, delivering good quality jobs and economic growth across the piece, and then working together to raise overall standards in the international rules-based system. So we're very focused on those. 3 areas that stand out in particular are digital, decarbonisation and defence, all underpinned by the UK's financial and professional services ecosystem, which we know is world leading.
I like the fact that there's 3 Ds that you've mentioned.
3 Ds, that's how we call them.
Digital, decarbonisation and defence, but not to be mistaken for 3D jobs, right? But when we're talking about digital, decarbonisation and defence, you've also mentioned indivisible, you've also mentioned intrinsic, but how do we balance all this with the current geopolitical situation? I mean, when we're talking about President Trump and his ideas on, for example, from sweeping tariffs to climate change is not necessarily real. How does the UK position itself in terms of being a more balanced voice of reason?
So the UK is doubling down on our free and fair trade agenda. So we have recently, as you know, acceded to CPTPP, where that is a high standards trading agreement that's committed to the international rules-based system. We are absolutely committed to our climate objectives. Our government has 5 missions, as we call it. Our first mission is economic growth. Our second mission is around green energy and net zero. And the other 3 missions are understandably around healthcare, education, and also crime and safety. So that economic growth agenda we see as absolutely congruent with driving to net zero. You'll know the UK is a world leader in many of our decarbonising technologies. We're a leader in offshore wind, particularly offshore floating wind. We recently announced Rolls-Royce as our lead for small modular reactors in the nuclear space. And our overall balance of energy in the UK is very heavily on the renewable side.
How do you see perhaps the UK sharing some of this understanding with the region of ASEAN? For example, there's a lot of critique on net zero, whether that's even possible with the current situation that we're in, but also at the same time, you mentioned very strongly that economic growth needs to balance everything that you're talking about, from health, security, education. If there is no economic growth, if there is no economic prosperity, as EAGs like to put it, then all these other impetus and all of these other pillars that we're trying to push is going to hit a snag, don't you think?
Exactly as you say, it's economic growth that drives our ability to deliver public services, and it's economic growth and developments in productivity and skills that are going to allow us to be able to use new technologies to drive economic growth through ultimately cheaper energy costs in the future. So we have some incredible work going on across the ASEAN region, and as you mentioned, £52 billion worth of trade just with this region. The Asia Pacific region that I cover as Trade Commissioner, we're now at £137 billion of trade per year. So these are enormous numbers and an enormous value of interaction between British businesses and businesses in this region. And the level of ambition and drive and motivation in the green and clean energy space. We're speaking to ASEAN about the ASEAN connected grid, interconnectors between countries and other places, and many of our companies, people like Mott MacDonald, Arup, Turner Townsend, are doing exceptional work with governments and businesses across the region to look at how they can decarbonise, how they can green some of their industries, and how that can ultimately mean cheaper electricity prices in the long term in a green and sustainable manner. And we know that all of these challenges are ones the UK can't tackle alone, no individual country can.
Correct. And I think if we're talking about ASEAN, not only are we diverse in terms of where we at in terms of economic health, but we're also in different trajectories in terms of geopolitics, in terms of our relationships with different superpowers. If we're talking about the geography of the different ASEAN countries and the needs, not only in terms of clean energy, but how are we going to propel social and economic safety nets forward. And I think that it remains to be seen how UK as a dialogue partner is going to be able to look at while we're trying to champion sustainability, green growth, and all of these other ambitious targets that we have, that we do not kind of widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots that we are seeing existing in every single other regional bloc that I can think of. I want to dial back on, being an ASEAN partner and the bilateral trade that we have. What in your, I guess in the next 2 to 3 years, because now we don't use 5 to 10 years anymore, do we? What are some of the key growth areas, if we're talking about specifically in energy, digital economy, and definitely green finance, since you've mentioned that? Could you highlight some of the things that perhaps, the MSMEs in Malaysia could also ride on this wave? Because we know that 97% of Malaysian businesses are MSMEs. Thoughts, please.
So MSMEs are the backbone of every economy, and actually whilst there's differences in economies, one of the fascinating things about covering a region and travelling between so many different countries is the similarities are always much greater than the differences. So small and medium-sized enterprises are the backbone of all the economies in this region and back at home in the UK for us. And we know that particularly with new trading agreements, we need to put extra emphasis on making sure that very complex trading arrangements can be understandable to small and medium-sized enterprises that don't necessarily have access to the wealth of information internally through specialists that some of the larger companies have. So many of the UK's programmes as an ASEAN dialogue partner have a real focus on MSMEs, inclusive finance, making sure that we're combating an asymmetry of information that exists, particularly at the small and medium-sized businesses element. We also are involving banks more because they have such a broad reach. We as the UK have an organisation called UK Export Finance, which helps to promote UK exports by giving working capital guarantees, and as long as 20% of the content is from the UK, which actually is a very, very generous allowance compared to other export credit agencies around the world. So we're driving hard on small and medium-sized enterprises. The UK actually has just announced a small business strategy because, exactly to your point, we recognise just how important small and medium-sized enterprises are. In the UK, that looks at the number of payment days for invoices because we know that has a disproportionate impact on smaller businesses. And that's where things like the finance pillar of the economic integration programme that I mentioned earlier, some of those lessons and some of those techniques are directly transferable across here to ASEAN. And also, we always learn a lot when we're out here as well. So the exchange is two-way. And the goal is absolutely common between us in terms of delivering high quality jobs, employment across partners, and trade is not a transaction, it's a genuine partnership. And we know the trading relationships that succeed are the ones where there's genuine benefit to both sides.
Martin, I want to ask you, we've talked about the green economy, of green financing. I want to cover sort of like the rainbow spectrum. We know that the UK is very well known for its orange economy, the creatives, from everything to West End to, the creative economy is definitely something that has been at the forefront of how UK also shares its culture with the world. And then, of course, when we're talking about the aging population across the globe, we've got the silver economy. Now, specifically in terms of the creative economy, as well as the aging population economy, which I know is two completely different dichotomies, but I do believe that there is synergies in where the UK can also share its values or its ideas or some of its efforts in ASEAN. Is there any affirmative action or plans in terms of helping MSMEs in these two spaces to be able to grow?
Well, on the creative industries front, I must say Malaysia has done the most tremendous job at its chairmanship of ASEAN this year. And last night, the senior economic officials from Malaysia treated us to a fantastic cultural performance of Malaysian creative industries, which was spectacular. But outside of that, creative industries is one of the sectors that's prioritised in the UK's industrial strategy. We realise what a powerful agent that can be for sharing values, for sharing ideas, for learning across cultures and engaging a population in different ways than we might have done a generation ago. And we see that across the world. So we're prioritising that because we know of its cultural significance, but as well as its commercial significance to us and our partners. And also
in the way in which it actually promotes dialogue, because I do believe that in today's age, there are so many really complex and complicated conversations that need to be had, not only among internal parties of a country, but also inter-country dialogue. And I do believe that creative industry or ways in discussing about difficult things in creative ways.
Absolutely.
Allow for dialogue and understanding to happen. In terms of the silver economy, what are your thoughts? You know that Malaysia is aging. 2065, we're going to be a super aged nation. The same with Singapore and quite a lot of the countries in ASEAN. Leading on the back of what's happening in the global north, what are some of the things that you think we should prioritize as ASEAN's strategy?
So I think this is where the confluence of so many areas of sector strength between the UK and Malaysia and wider ASEAN really come into play. So we know that technology is going to be a key enabler as with an ageing population, both in providing healthcare services, but also in monitoring. Some of the tech that would previously have been used by nurses and doctors are now wearable technologies that you can have in the home, and they can look forward in terms of prevention rather than just looking at cure of illnesses. AstraZeneca are here in Malaysia, a UK firm employing over 800 people in this country. We are absolutely committed to working together with ASEAN across the healthcare spectrum because this is absolutely a shared challenge.
And I think it'll be really interesting to see how the UK is going to be able to partner with ASEAN, not just in terms of downstream us being a user of technology, but of course moving up the dial in terms of upstream, because we've got, biologics, we've got, of course, cutting edge. You said wearable technology. We're also talking about health in terms of research, not just necessarily the users of the drugs that come out at the end, but how do we partner in a more upstream manner. Now, we cannot talk about this relationship without talking about UK's accession to the CPTPP, right? It's a mouthful, but actually stands for the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement on Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's a long acronym, but we know that it covers a market of 500 million people and it's 15% in the global GDP. So what are some of the tangible benefits that you're aiming to see early on in this relationship? What are some of the success stories that you are hoping to see?
It really is quite the mouthful and certainly everyone's favourite acronym.
We should put it in tongue twister.
We certainly should. So CPTPP is already showing benefits across the region. Actually, the UK already had some free trade agreements with countries within CPTPP, but very significantly for both Malaysia and Brunei for the UK, CPTPP gives us our first ever free trade agreement with both Malaysia and Brunei in this region. Now, that really matters. And on top of that, the existing free trade agreements that we have are around tariffs and some other elements. Something that often gets forgotten about CPTPP is that it also covers things like investment protections and provisions called cumulation provisions, where you're transferring interim components of goods or services between countries that then assimilate into final products. And importantly, for government procurement programmes, it now gives Malaysian businesses and British businesses the same rights when applying for government procurements in each other's countries. So we are already starting to see the benefits of this, from vehicles to cocoa. I know there were some major deliveries of palm oil from Malaysia into the UK that have benefited from the reductions in tariffs.
And that's a relationship we've had for many, many years.
It certainly is. And now it's happening without tariffs, which delivers better prices for consumers and therefore allows businesses to thrive. And that's what we want to say. I think thriving is a really great word to describe the UK-Malaysia and also the UK-ASEAN relationship.
Let's talk about education, right? People to people, transfer of knowledge. This is something that I think for a lot of Malaysians aspiring to be able to study abroad is a big thing. And we know that education between Malaysia and the UK has been established and growing. I think we believe right now we've got more than 5 campuses of universities, UK universities here in Malaysia, not including boarding schools, that have also started. And we're seeing new forms of collaborations in terms of skills, research, training. We've got over 80,000 Malaysians studying in the UK, and now we're also seeing UK students coming to Malaysia to study. So what are your thoughts on where this can further grow, understanding that there's so many different options now for twinning, studying online? What are some of your thoughts on where we can grow this?
I think education is a real backbone of the UK-Malaysia relationship, and actually the UK's relationship with so many countries, but I think it's particularly profound here in Malaysia. So many of the business people that we work with have studied in the UK, and so many Brits that work out here have studied in Malaysia. So it really is a bilateral partnership. I had the enormous privilege of visiting Nottingham University's campus here a few weeks ago on my last visit. Absolutely,
Yes.
and this year they're celebrating their 25th anniversary here. So this is not a new thing by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
So I think it's absolutely core to the relationship. I think there's more options now than ever before, particularly with more British universities setting up here so that Malaysian students can get a British quality education with the same infrastructure and course content as you might get in the UK, but to have the option to do it locally and also to have the option to do it combined with some time here in Malaysia and also some time back in the UK.
And we're seeing that happening
versa.
both sides, right? We're seeing also the UK students having the option of doing maybe the final 2 years or the first 2 years in a different country, whichever the country that partnership may be. And we're also seeing universities that are setting up campus, which is, for example, a local university in collaboration with the local UK university to be pushing that. But in terms of education, what do you foresee as some of the fields that you think would be the best for us to combine force?
So I think we've mentioned digital, and I think what we call digital trade today will just be what we call trade tomorrow.
Yes.
So much of the work we're doing across ASEAN that's really pioneering is around digital trade and technologies. Building on AI and the increase in compute capacity combined with Malaysia's semiconductor industry and wider array of high-tech industries, we are doing more and more work on how digital trade can be a mitigant to the tyranny of distance, but it also delivers more efficient trade quicker and in a more auditable way to reduce things like fraud or errors, and that leads to greater profits for companies but also lower prices for the consumer. So digital and tech are absolutely the buzzwords
Definitely.
for this.
And you've mentioned something very important here, because while we're talking about ease of business, efficiency, lowering the cost of things, that it has to be balanced with governance and frameworks and checks and balance so that, be it cybersecurity or data or AI doesn't actually, either implode on itself or grow to the level that both or all the different countries that are working together is going to have a problem. We know that Malaysia's digital minister was at the London Tech Week, which was just in June recently. So what does that signal in terms of deeper UK-Malaysia commitment, especially since you mentioned digital trade? So I want to double down on tech, AI and cybersecurity.
So we were delighted to welcome the Digital Minister over to London Tech Week, which, as you'll know, is a real gathering of all of international tech specialists descend on London, businesses, government agencies, leading speakers and thought leaders from across the world. And we really see the UK as a global centre for driving forward the tech agenda, particularly around AI safety. You'll know the UK was the first country to set up the International AI Safety Security Summit. We think this is such an important pillar of the way that tech is going.
And Cambridge is also the home of the International Watch Internet Watch Foundation that has been there.
Absolutely.
Working together with Interpol and all of the other countries. So where do you foresee this going forward? Because we know that cybersecurity is definitely a huge area. I think in the last few years, we've seen a proliferation of cyber crimes, scams, all sorts of issues. And I do believe that we need international, inter-country cooperation now. We're going to clamp down on some of these efforts and challenges.
And the networks that are working against citizens across our countries, they are regional and international networks.
Definitely.
And therefore regional and international cooperation has to be the way that we tackle these. Alongside setting out internationally agreed rules and standards, therefore the more cooperation we have in this space, the more likely it is that we'll be able to provide the best possible solutions for our citizens, whether it's against scams, protecting people, or whether it's on the positive side, driving innovation forward to make people's lives easier and more efficient, and to allow people to do more and be more.
Martin, as we zoom into the end of the conversation, I do want to ask you on halal exports, right? We know that Malaysia, given its role as a strategic hub for ASEAN, especially for halal exports, we've got US 68 billion already annually in terms of strong logistics base. Do you see Malaysia as UK's gateway for businesses for the wider ASEAN markets, especially in the halal sector?
It's a key area we're looking at. We have a thriving halal industry in the UK, so there's a natural partnership there. But it's one of so many components of the overall UK-Malaysia relationship. And I think the centrality of ASEAN within the region really helps this region operate beyond, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So halal, tech, decarbonisation, all of the subjects we've discussed today, I see as an incredibly positive and energising agenda. And actually these are all of the things that we've been discussing in the ASEAN Senior Economic Officials meeting over the last 24 to 48 hours. And we're making really good progress. I should mention that we've delivered over 95% of all the commitments the UK has now made within ASEAN as part of our plan of action.
In that short discussion span? In this short
over the last 4 years.
All
no,
right, okay.
I won't claim them over the last 48 hours.
Well done. Now, looking ahead for 2030, what does success for UK-Malaysia partnership will look like for you? What are some of the milestones that you're hoping to achieve moving forward?
So success means continuing to drive productive economies that give better jobs to our citizens, that grow our trading relationship, and that bring our countries and the region closer together to deliver security, prosperity and stability. And that means aligning our strategic plans, in the UK's case, our industrial strategy and our trade strategy, and in ASEAN's case, the community vision for 2045. So success is us having a very clear, agreed understanding of each other's plans and a real understanding of where those plans can work very well together so that they deliver jobs and growth on both sides. And to our earlier point, it's that economic growth that will drive our ability to deliver on net zero commitments in both regions, as well as commitments around education, around health and around public safety. So alignment and a genuine sense of purpose and action to deliver prosperity for our citizens.
You've mentioned quite a few things. You said continuation to drive not only centrality, you spoke about indivisibility, intrinsic strategy, cohesion and alignment, and of course there are clear and agreed understanding and respect between the countries that are involved in the ASEAN bloc, where together we can move towards economic prosperity for all, while at the same time caring for the planet. You did say sustainability, education, security and impact for all. Thank you so much for joining us today. That wraps up this hour's broadcast. We look forward to seeing more of UK's partnership with Malaysia and the ASEAN, and of course as it continues to grow for years ahead. Don't forget to visit BERNAMA.com and follow us on our social media, YouTube, X, Instagram and Facebook. This has been the BERNAMA World. I am NADIAH and thanks for watching. Terima kasih.
Thank you for having me.